Hi, I'm Siobhán Fletcher, one of the journalists up at Manx Radio. Welcome to the latest edition of our newscast. Now, today is World Meningitis Day, a day marked the world over to raise awareness about the condition. Meningitis is an infection of the protective membranes that surround the brain and spinal cord, and it can be very serious if not treated quickly. One charity working year-round to raise awareness is Meningitis Now, an organisation based over in the UK. I spoke to Chief Executive of the charity, Dr. Tom Nutt, to talk signs and symptoms. I guess first of all, can you tell me a little bit about the charity and the work that you do?
Yes, so we're a charity that was founded over 35 years ago here in the UK, following an outbreak of meningitis in Stroud in Gloucestershire. And I suppose we're like a lot of charities in the sense that we were founded by some parents who came together, parents who'd either been bereaved and lost a child to the disease, or who were struggling to bringing up a child who'd been left with the after effects of the disease. And of course, in those days, there was very little information about meningitis, about the signs and symptoms. And of course, there were definitely no vaccines then that could have prevented the disease. So, we were founded by a coming together of parents, all with a common interest to want to help others and provide support, but also to help fund research that might lead one day to the creation of vaccines to prevent this terrible disease.
And I'm sure that many parents especially have heard of meningitis, but in sort of layman's terms, what is it?
So it's an infection that causes the inflammation of the membrane that protects the brain and the spinal cord, called the meninges. And it can be caused by bacteria, and the bacterial disease can prove to be fatal. And it's a devastating disease. It can kill within 24 hours. It can also be caused by viruses. Viral meningitis, though, it doesn't prove to be fatal. It's a self-limiting disease. But in either case, it can be terrifying. As I say, the symptoms often come on fairly slowly and can be easily confused with other things. But sadly and tragically, the condition can deteriorate very rapidly and results in death in sadly far too many cases even today with the vaccines.
And I guess to sort of touch on that there then, this isn't just something that, babies can get. I think there's, like we were touching on a little bit before we started recording, that it's a sort of a common thing that we talk about with parents and kids, and you keep an eye out for your children and there's a rash and things like that. But this can affect everyone, can't it?
It's a disease that can, in fact, yes, affect everyone at all ages. And then, as you say, often it's been sort of misunderstood as a disease that only affects babies. But yes, across all ages, people are at risk, especially when they haven't had a vaccination. Although perhaps we can come on to that because there are various different vaccinations and they don't protect against all causes of the disease. But what you see is that there are different age groups who are at greater risk than others. And that remains infants under the age of 1, but also adolescents, particularly people of university or college age. And then older adults are also at risk, which of course is when your natural immunity starts to wane. So actually people's awareness of what to look out for and awareness of the fact that they may be at risk is really critically important, because when people are aware, then they can take steps that might help to either prevent the disease or to ensure that they're getting the medical help that could make a difference and even save a life.
And so I appreciate it'd be quite difficult to go through every single sign and symptom. But what are sort of the main ones maybe for the various age groups that, anyone listening should look out for?
Yeah. So I suppose what you're looking for across all ages is just someone who is unusually unwell and often sort of rapidly deteriorating. And we often encourage people to sort of trust their instincts, that when either it's yourself becoming unwell, unusually unwell, or a loved one, like such as a child or a close friend or family member, someone who's unusually ill, that's often something, a sign that you might want to sort of take action. More specifically, If you're thinking about babies and toddlers, what you're looking out for is a fever with cold hands and feet. The child might be sort of fretful, with rapid breathing, perhaps an unusual cry, not eating, of course, maybe drowsy. You also get what you might think of as some of the sort of classic symptoms. So perhaps an aversion to bright light or a stiff neck. And in some cases, there may be a rash, but it's very much not all cases. And those symptoms can appear in any order, and some may not appear at all. So our message is always, look out for someone who's unusually unwell, but don't wait for any one specific sign, because it might not ever appear, and that could prove to be misleading. So similarly with adolescents and young adults and older adults, you're looking for similar things: a fever with cold hands and feet, a headache, perhaps, that aversion to bright lights, and a stiff neck. It's easy to confuse with, say, flu, or in the case of young adults, maybe a hangover, that sort of stuff. So again, it can be misleading. Obviously, adults do get the rash, but as I say, very much not in all cases. So our message as a charity is trust your instincts. Do look out for those signs and symptoms, but don't wait for any one particular one. You should always seek urgent medical help, if you are concerned.
And you mentioned earlier, obviously, we now have vaccines for meningitis. When your charity was set up, that wasn't the case. So very recently, we've had a very tragic case, really, of Lucas Martin here on the Isle of Man. He died at the age of 21. We've actually chatted to his dad, and he was telling us that he was actually vaccinated. So obviously, then there's quite the misconception maybe that, if you're vaccinated against something, you can't really catch it, or you have a really low risk. But obviously, that's not always the case.
Yeah. That's right. And of course, what we're experiencing is that the vaccines have been introduced over the past several decades. So some people at certain ages will have had those vaccines and will be therefore growing up with protection. And others won't have had those vaccinations. So there are 5 vaccines in the NHS schedule over here in the UK, and I believe the Isle of Man has an immunisation schedule that mirrors that of the NHS. So the good news is that infants and children will be growing up with vaccinations that should protect against most of the causes of meningitis. And that's fantastic news. That's huge progress from where we were 35 years ago. But for people of, say, Lucas's age, he should have had vaccinations that would have protected him and protected others through herd immunity against some of the causes of meningitis, but not one of the most common forms of the disease, which is called meningococcal group B, Men-B for short. Sadly, we're seeing an increase in cases of Men-B in that age group. And although infants will be protected against Men-B, youngsters, students, and older adults won't be. So it is a confusing message for your listeners in some respects, because it's great news that there are these vaccines, and naturally we would encourage anyone who's entitled and eligible to a vaccine to get one, especially where it's free on the health service. But people also need to be aware that many other age groups simply won't have had those vaccines. So awareness of both the signs and symptoms and your eligibility to vaccines is really important.
Is it concerning to kind of see that rise in cases in young people? I mean, what's maybe the charity's message to parents whose kids are off to university this year, or because like you said, you can have some pretty brutal hangovers at uni, and how are you meant to sort of differentiate, between that and the symptoms?
Yeah. Well, our message, to parents of youngsters that age, and also to youngsters themselves, is just be aware. As I say, the best thing to do is to make sure you've had that vaccination, any vaccines to which you are entitled, but do be aware that there will be other causes of the disease, which means you also need to have that vigilance. It's a really, really good question to ask about how you spot the signs of the disease when it could be something like fresh as flu, or it could be COVID, or it could be hangover. And I suppose, as I say, it comes back to looking out for signs of rapid deterioration, those kind of unusual telltale signs that something's just not quite right. Of course, it's not always as easy as that. So if people, particularly youngsters, are going off to university and maybe living in halls of residence or something, if you become ill, if someone becomes ill, just make sure you tell your friends, your next door neighbour in the room next door. Just say you're not feeling well. Get someone to keep an eye on you. As I've already said, the disease is terrible in the sense that it can kill within 24 hours. So people who sort of lock themselves away are potentially putting themselves at risk. And really, no one should feel inhibited from calling the emergency services, calling their GP if they are worried. It's better to get these things checked out than to leave it. And I think, many doctors and nurses, I know we're very aware of the pressure on health services, in the UK, arguably across the world, I suppose, at the moment, but it's often better to get these things checked out than to leave them.
And then I guess my final question for you, Tom, would be anyone listening, if they want to be signposted to any helpful information, if they are worried and want to get in touch with the charity yourselves, how are they best to do that?
So the best and most accessible place to find information, including all our contact details, is on our website, which is www.meningitisnow.org.
As you're probably aware, World Meningitis Day will have a particular poignancy for many on the Isle of Man today. 3 weeks ago, we learned local man Lucas Martin had died from it, aged just 21. His former football clubs on the island described him as a genuinely lovely person and an amazing lad and friend to so many. But it was a tribute from his dad, Brett, which caught the attention of many online. He sat down with Beth Espy to talk about Lucas and the legacy he leaves behind. You can listen to that conversation in full in another newscast available now.